Human soldier. Mark Jones never expected to save an alien princess, let alone face a marriage proposal from her. But as he crouched behind the twisted wreckage of a Talaxian shuttle, tending to the wounds of the unconscious female alien, he realized his actions might change the course of the human-Talaxian conflict forever. The acrid smell of burning metal filled Mark's nostrils as he worked. His squad had been ambushed during a routine patrol on Talax, a planet at the center of a bitter territorial dispute between the United Earth Federation and the native Talaxians. In the chaos of the attack, Mark found himself separated from his unit, his combat medic training the only thing keeping him focused. The sound of distant weapons fire echoed across the alien landscape. Mark knew he should be trying to regroup with his squad, but the injured Talaxian before him took precedence. As he applied a pressure bandage to a nasty gash on her arm, he noticed the intricate insignia on her clothing. This was no ordinary Talaxian. A groan escaped the alien's lips as she regained consciousness. Her eyes, a startling shade of violet, locked onto Mark's face. Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Combat medic Mark Jones, United Earth Federation," he replied, continuing his treatment. "Can you tell me your name?" "I am Draco," she said, wincing as she tried to sit up. "Princess of the Talaxian people." Mark's hands froze for a moment as the implications of her words sank in. He had just saved the life of an enemy royal. His military training told him to take her as a prisoner, but his ethical code as a medic demanded he continue treatment. Before he could decide on a course of action, Draco spoke again. "I was fleeing an arranged marriage," she explained, her eyes darting nervously to the sky. "It was supposed to broker peace with a rival alien faction, but I couldn't go through with it." Mark's mind raced. He needed to contact his superiors to let them know about this potentially game-changing development. But as he reached for his comm unit, the sound of approaching vehicles made him pause. A Talaxian search party burst into view, their weapons trained on Mark and Draco. In that split second, Mark made a decision that would alter the course of his life and potentially the entire conflict. He raised his hands in surrender, choosing to prioritize Draco's safety and the slim chance of a peaceful resolution. As the Talaxian forces surrounded them, Mark found himself being escorted alongside the princess. They were taken to a massive structure that could only be the royal palace. The ornate architecture and advanced technology on display made Mark acutely aware of how little humans truly knew about Talaxian culture. Inside the palace, Mark stood before the Talaxian king, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. The gratitude in the king's eyes was unmistakable as he looked at the human who had saved his daughter's life. It was clear that Mark's actions had opened a door that diplomacy had failed to unlock. Yet as murmurs of hero and peacemaker circulated among the Talaxian court, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he might be viewed as a traitor back home. He had chosen to surrender to the enemy, even if it was in the name of saving a life and potentially ending the conflict. Amidst the political turmoil, Mark noticed Draco watching him intently. There was something in her gaze that went beyond mere gratitude. As their eyes met, Mark realized that his impulsive act of compassion might have far-reaching consequences, not just for their two species, but for his personal future as well. Little did he know that soon, he would face a proposal that would challenge everything he thought he knew about interspecies relations. Mark's world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. One moment, he was a combat medic on a routine patrol. The next, he found himself standing before the Talaxian king, acutely aware of the weight of his actions and the potential consequences they held for both his own future and the fragile peace between humans and Talaxians. The days that followed were a blur of interrogations and confinement. Mark was escorted to a secure chamber within the palace, its alien architecture both fascinating and disorienting. The room was comfortable enough, with a large window offering a view of the Talaxian capital's skyline, a sight that served as a constant reminder of how far from home he truly was. Talaxian officials came and went, each with their own set of probing questions. They dissected every aspect of Mark's life, from his childhood on Earth to his military training and deployment. Mark answered as truthfully as he could, acutely aware that his words could either bridge the gap between their species or widen it irreparably. During one such interrogation, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Princess Draco, her arm still bandaged from the shuttle crash, dismissed the officials with a wave of her hand. As the door closed behind them, she turned to Mark, her violet eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and gratitude. "I hope they haven't been too harsh with you," she said, her voice softer than Mark remembered. "Nothing I can't handle," Mark replied, offering a small smile. "How's the arm?" Draco glanced at her bandage. "Healing well, thanks to you. I've come to offer you a respite from the interrogations. Would you like to walk with me in the palace gardens?" Mark hesitated, eyeing the guards outside his door. Draco noticed his apprehension and added, "Don't worry, I've arranged it with my father. You'll be under my protection." As they strolled through the lush alien flora of the palace gardens, Mark found himself opening up to Draco. They talked about their respective worlds, childhoods, and the weight of expectations placed upon them. Mark spoke of his decision to become a combat medic, driven by a desire to save lives rather than take them. Draco shared her fears about the arranged marriage she had fled from, and her hopes for her people's future. These clandestine meetings became a welcome break from the monotony of Mark's confinement. With each encounter, the barriers between them seemed to crumble. Mark found himself captivated by Draco's intellect and persistence, while she admired his compassion and courage. However, their budding connection was overshadowed by the growing tensions between their people. News reached the palace of the United Earth Federation's ultimatum: release Mark immediately or face military action. The Talaxian court buzzed with whispers of war, and Mark could feel the mounting pressure on King Zaxalor to make a decision. One evening, as Mark and Draco sat in a secluded corner of the gardens, she turned to him with a look of dedication. "Mark, I have a proposition for you, one that could change everything." Before she could continue, the palace alarms blared to life. The sound of explosions echoed in the distance, and the night sky lit up with the flashes of weapons fire. Palace guards rushed into the garden, surrounding Mark and Draco. "Your Highness, we're under attack," one guard shouted. "General Zorn has launched a coup. We need to get you and the human to safety immediately." Mark's combat instincts kicked in. He grabbed Draco's hand and followed the guards as they raced through the palace corridors. The once serene halls were now a chaos of panicked courtiers and scrambling soldiers. They reached the throne room to find King Zaxalor barking orders to his loyal commanders. He turned as Mark and Draco entered, relief washing over his face at the sight of his daughter. "The rebels have taken control of our main communication centers," the king informed them. "We're cut off from the other cities and Earth. Mark, I'm afraid your people may think we're responsible for this attack." Mark's mind raced. He needed to contact his superiors to explain the situation before it spiraled into all-out war. But first, they needed to secure the palace. As if reading his thoughts, Draco spoke up. "Father, Mark's combat experience could be invaluable. Let him help us." The king hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Very well. Mark Jones, will you stand with us against these traitors?" Mark straightened, his voice firm. "I will, Your Majesty. My duty is to protect life, regardless of species." With that, Mark found himself thrust into the heart of Talaxian politics and warfare. He worked alongside the royal guards, helping to fortify the palace defenses and tend to the wounded. His actions did not go unnoticed. Many Talaxians who had been wary of him now looked at the human with newfound respect. As the night wore on, reports trickled in of General Zorn's forces advancing on the capital. The rebel leader's face appeared on the few communication channels still under royal control, his message clear: surrender the human and abdicate the throne, or face annihilation. In a quiet moment amidst the chaos, Draco pulled Mark aside. "There's something you need to know," she whispered urgently. "Our intelligence suggests that Zorn might be receiving support from the Krexer, the alien faction I was supposed to marry into. This coup could be part of a larger plot to destabilize our entire sector." The revelation hit Mark like a physical blow. What had started as a simple act of compassion on a battlefield had now escalated into a potential interstellar conflict. As he processed this information, Mark realized that his next actions could reshape the balance of power far beyond the borders of Talax. The distant rumble of approaching rebel forces snapped Mark back to the present. He looked at Draco, seeing the worry in her eyes mirrored his own. Whatever came next, he knew that the fate of both their peoples now rested, at least in part, on his shoulders. As dawn broke over the Talaxian capital, casting an eerie glow through the smoke-filled sky, Mark steeled himself for what was to come. The choices he would make in the coming hours would test not only his loyalty to Earth, but also the growing bond he felt with Draco and her people. The battle for Talax, and perhaps the future of human-Talaxian relations, was about to begin. The thunderous sound of explosions rocked the palace as Mark's mind raced, analyzing their tactical situation. He turned to King Zaxalor, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Your Majesty, we need to organize our defenses immediately. May I take charge of coordinating our forces?" The king nodded, a mixture of relief and respect in his eyes. "Proceed, Mark Jones. You have my full authority." Mark sprang into action, his combat training kicking in. He gathered the Talaxian guards, quickly assessing their capabilities and equipment. "Form 3 defensive lines," he ordered, sketching a rough map of the palace grounds. "First line at the outer walls, second in the courtyard, and third here in the throne room. We'll funnel them in and wear them down." As the guards scrambled to their positions, Mark noticed Princess Draco watching him intently. He approached her, speaking in a low voice. "Your Highness, I need your help. Do you know of any hidden passages or escape routes in the palace?" Draco's brow furrowed in concentration. "There are rumors of ancient tunnels beneath the palace, but they've been lost to time. No one in living memory has seen them." Mark's eyes lit up. "Those could be our ace in the hole. Can you help me find any information about them?" While Draco delved into the palace archives, Mark continued fortifying their defenses. He instructed the guards on improvised barricades and optimal firing positions, transforming the ornate palace into a fortress. Hours passed in a blur of activity. The rebel forces probed their defenses, testing for weaknesses. Mark's strategies proved effective, repelling wave after wave of attackers. But he knew they couldn't hold out forever. As night fell, Draco burst into the makeshift command center, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mark, I found something!" She spread out an ancient map on the table. "These tunnels do exist. They lead all the way out of the city." Mark studied the map intently, his mind already formulating new plans. "This changes everything. We can use these tunnels to outmaneuver Zorn's forces." He assembled a small team to explore the tunnels, leaving Captain Vex, a stern but capable Talaxian officer, in charge of the palace defenses. Mark led the group through a hidden entrance behind an old tapestry, the musty air of the tunnels filling their lungs as they descended. The network of passages was vast and complex. As they mapped out the tunnels, Mark's team stumbled upon a group of civilian Talaxians hiding from the conflict. Among them was Krell, an elderly Talaxian with sharp eyes and a dignified bearing. "Who are you?" Krell demanded, eyeing Mark suspiciously. "I'm Mark Jones, advisor to King Zaxalor," Mark replied, noting the flash of recognition in Krell's eyes. Krell stepped forward. "I was once an advisor to the king's father. I may have information that could help you." Over the next hour, Krell revealed crucial details about General Zorn's past, his potential weaknesses, and the locations of loyal Talaxian military units across the planet. Mark's mind raced with the possibilities this information opened up. Returning to the palace, Mark found the situation had deteriorated. The rebels had breached the outer defenses and were pushing into the courtyard. He rushed to the front lines, organizing a counterattack that drove the rebels back temporarily. In the brief respite, Mark outlined his plan to the king and Draco. "We need to evacuate through the tunnels," he explained. "We can regroup with loyal forces and launch a counteroffensive from a position of strength." As they prepared for evacuation, alarms blared throughout the palace. The rebels had broken through. Mark found himself in the thick of the fighting, coordinating the defense while trying to buy time for the evacuation. In the chaos, he spotted a rebel soldier taking aim at Captain Vex. Without hesitation, Mark tackled the Talaxian officer, the rebels' shot missing them by inches. As they scrambled for cover, Vex looked at Mark with newfound respect. "I misjudged you, human. My life is yours." With the rebels closing in, Mark organized the rear guard. "Go!" he shouted to the king and Draco. "We'll hold them off!" The firefight was intense, the air thick with energy blasts and the acrid smell of burning metal. Mark moved from position to position, encouraging the defenders and coordinating their fire. A stray shot grazed his arm, the pain sharp and immediate, but he pushed through it. Finally, with the last of the evacuees safely in the tunnels, Mark ordered the rear guard to fall back. They retreated through the passages, collapsing sections behind them to slow any pursuit. As they stumbled through the dark tunnels, Draco noticed Mark's injury. "You're hurt," she said, her voice filled with concern. She tended to his wound as they walked, her gentle touch a stark contrast to the violence they'd just escaped. They emerged in a dense forest miles from the city. Captain Vex was waiting with a contingent of loyal troops, their numbers bolstered by the civilians they'd rescued from the tunnels. As the group caught their breath, Mark's mind was already working on their next move. He approached the king, who was deep in conversation with his advisors. "Your Majesty," Mark said, "we need to act quickly. I have a plan to counter Zorn's rebellion, but it will require your trust and authority." King Zaxler studied Mark for a moment, then nodded. "You have proven yourself time and again, Mark Jones. What do you propose?" Mark outlined his strategy, rallying more loyalist forces using Krell's intelligence, exposing Zorn's connection to the rival alien faction, and attempting to contact Earth for support. The king listened intently, his expression growing more determined with each point. "Your plan is sound," the king said finally, "but to execute it, you'll need more than just my trust." He turned to address the gathered Talaxians. "From this moment, Mark Jones is appointed as special advisor to the crown, with all the authority that entails." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mark stood stunned, the weight of this unprecedented appointment settling on his shoulders. He caught Draco's eye, seeing pride and something deeper reflected there. As the news of Mark's appointment spread through their growing band of loyalists, it also reached General Zorn. The rebel leader, enraged by this human's continued interference, issued a planet-wide bounty for Mark's capture or elimination. Undeterred, Mark began preparations for their counteroffensive. He worked closely with Draco to modify Talaxian communication equipment, hoping to break through the rebels' blockade and contact Earth. Meanwhile, he sent out small teams to make contact with scattered loyalist forces, slowly building their strength. As dawn broke on their forest hideout, Mark stood with Draco and the king, watching their forces prepare for the challenges ahead. The fate of Talax, human-Talaxian relations, and their very lives hung in the balance. But as Mark looked at the commitment on the faces around him, he felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Mark's appointment as special advisor to the crown sent ripples through their makeshift camp. Talaxian soldiers whispered among themselves, some skeptical, others intrigued by this unprecedented move. But Mark had no time to dwell on the implications. He immediately set to work, poring over the intelligence Krell had provided. "These outposts," Mark said, pointing to several locations on a worn map, "are our best bet for reinforcements. If we can reach them, we might just have a fighting chance." King Zaxler nodded gravely. "But how do we contact them without alerting Zorn's forces?" Mark's eyes gleamed with grit. "The tunnels, they're our secret weapon. We'll use them to move undetected." Over the next few days, Mark led a series of covert missions through the labyrinthine underground passages. The air was thick and musty, the darkness broken only by the dim glow of their portable lights. Each step echoed ominously, a constant reminder of the tons of rock above their heads. At the first outpost, they emerged to find wary Talaxian soldiers, their weapons trained on the tunnel entrance. Mark stepped forward, hands raised. "We come on behalf of King Zaxlor," he announced, his voice steady. "General Zorn has betrayed the crown. We need your help to restore order." The soldiers exchanged glances, their grip on their weapons loosening slightly. Mark seized the moment, laying out the situation in clear, concise terms. As he spoke, he could see the doubt in their eyes give way to willpower. By the end of the week, their forces had nearly doubled. Each successful mission bolstered their strength and spread word of the human who fought for Talax. Mark's reputation grew, whispered in awe around campfires and in hushed conversations. During one such mission, they stumbled upon a small research facility tucked away in the mountains. Inside, they found Lyra, a brilliant Talaxian engineer, working feverishly on a complex device. "It's a long-range communicator," she explained, her eyes bright with excitement. "It can cut through any jamming signal. I've been trying to contact the capital, but—" Mark's mind raced with possibilities. "Can you modify it to reach our forces?" Lyra nodded eagerly. "Give me a day and I can have it operational." With Lyra's device, coordinating their growing army became infinitely easier. Mark used it to orchestrate simultaneous strikes against key rebel positions, catching Zorn's forces off guard. Meanwhile, Princess Draco had been hard at work with Lyra, delving deep into secure databases. Their efforts paid off when they uncovered a trove of encrypted messages between Zorn and the rival alien faction. "Look at this," Draco said, her voice tight with anger as she showed Mark a decoded transmission. "Weapons shipments, tactical data. Zorn's been planning this for months." Mark's teeth clenched. "We need to get this information out. Can we broadcast it?" Lyra nodded. "I can modify the communicator to transmit on all frequencies, but we'll need to get closer to the capital for maximum effect." The decision was made. They would move on the capital, broadcasting Zorn's treachery as they went. Mark spent days planning the assault, poring over maps and intel reports. When the day finally came, the tension was palpable. Mark addressed the assembled forces, his voice carrying across the sea of Talaxian faces. "Today, we fight not just for the crown, but for the very soul of Talax. Remember, Zorn is the true enemy here. Many of those following him have been deceived. Our goal is to minimize casualties and restore peace." The assault began at dawn. Mark led the charge on the main government complex, the sound of energy weapons and explosions filling the air. He moved with fluid grace, years of combat training evident in every motion. In the thick of the battle, Mark found himself face to face with Krax, Zorn's fearsome lieutenant. The Talaxian warrior towered over him, eyes blazing with hatred. "So, this is the human who thinks he can save Talax," Krax sneered. Mark said nothing, settling into a fighting stance. Krax lunged, his powerful fist whistling through the air. Mark ducked and weaved, looking for an opening. The two combatants circled each other, trading blows in a deadly dance. Despite Krax's superior strength, Mark's agility and training gave him an edge. He waited for his moment, then struck with lightning speed. A flurry of precise hits sent Krax stumbling backward. With a final, decisive blow, Mark knocked the Talaxian warrior unconscious. The Loyalist forces pressed their advantage, securing key points throughout the city. Lyra's device broadcast the evidence of Zorn's betrayal, causing chaos in the rebel ranks. Soldiers laid down their arms, turning against their former leaders. Victory seemed within reach when the news came. A united Earth Federation fleet had entered the system, their intentions unknown. The atmosphere in the command center turned tense, the previous elation evaporating instantly. Mark's mind raced. He knew the UEF protocols, the potential for misunderstanding. In that moment, he made his decision. "I'll go," he said, his voice cutting through the worried murmurs. "I can explain the situation, prevent this from escalating further." King Zaxlor looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Are you certain? This is not your fight, Mark Jones. You've already done more than we could have asked." Mark smiled grimly. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, it became my fight the moment I landed on this planet." As preparations were made for his departure, Mark found a moment alone with Princess Draco. They stood in silence for a beat, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "Mark, Draco began, her usual composure faltering. He met her gaze, seeing in her eyes the same tumult of emotions he felt. "I know," he said softly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. I promise." They shared a brief, fierce embrace before Mark boarded the small craft that would take him to the UEF fleet. As he launched into the inky blackness of space, Mark's thoughts were split between the immediate crisis and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The UEF ships loomed large in his viewport, their sleek lines a stark contrast to the organic curves of Talaxian design. Mark took a deep breath, keying the communication system. This is Lieutenant Mark Jones, United Earth Federation Marines, requesting permission to board. Board, Lieutenant Mark Jones, United Earth Federation Marines, requesting permission to dock and meet with your commanding officer. There was a tense pause before a crisp female voice responded. Lieutenant Jones, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the CSS Intrepid. We've detected your approach. Explain your presence in this system immediately. Mark took a deep breath. Admiral, I'm transmitting a secure data package to you now. It contains critical information about the situation on Talax, including evidence of General Zorn's rebellion and the Talaxian royal family's alliance with human forces. Another pause followed as the Admiral presumably reviewed the data. Mark's heart raced, acutely aware that the fate of two worlds hung in the balance. Very well, Lieutenant, Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the comm. You have permission to dock. Be advised you'll be under heavy guard until we verify your claims. Understood, Admiral. Thank you. Mark guided his small craft into the Intrepid's cavernous docking bay. As the airlock cycled, he steeled himself for what lay ahead. The moment the door slid open, he was met by a squad of heavily armed UEF Marines. This way, Lieutenant, one of them said gruffly, gesturing with his rifle. Mark complied, walking briskly through the ship's gleaming corridors. The contrast between the Intrepid's sleek angular design and the organic curves of Talaxian architecture was stark. He felt a twinge of homesickness for Earth, quickly suppressed by the urgency of his mission. The bridge of the Intrepid was a hive of activity. Crew members moved with purpose between holographic displays and control panels. At the center stood Admiral Sarah Chen, a woman whose mere presence commanded respect. Lieutenant Jones, she said, her voice cool and measured, I hope you understand the gravity of your situation. You claim to speak for an alien government in the midst of a civil war. Explain yourself. Mark straightened, meeting the Admiral's gaze. Admiral Chen, thank you for agreeing to meet. The situation on Talax is complex, but the core facts are these. General Zorn, with backing from a rival alien faction, has staged a coup against the legitimate Talaxian government. I've been working with King Zaxalor and Princess Draco to counter this rebellion and maintain stability. He proceeded to give a detailed account of the events on Talax, from his initial crash landing to the most recent battles. As he spoke, he could see the Admiral's expression shift from skepticism to intrigue. And you believe an alliance between humans and Talaxians would be beneficial? Chen asked, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. Mark nodded. Absolutely, Admiral. The Talaxians have technology and resources that could greatly benefit humanity. More importantly, they share our values of democracy and individual rights. An alliance could provide a stable foothold in this sector, especially given the threat posed by the rival alien faction backing Zorn. Admiral Chen was silent for a moment, considering. Your actions are unprecedented, Lieutenant. Some might call them reckless. However, I can't deny the potential strategic advantages you've outlined. Before she could continue, a young officer approached urgently. Admiral, we're receiving distress signals from the planet's surface. It appears General Zorn has launched a major offensive against the Loyalist forces. Mark's blood ran cold. Admiral, please, we need to act now. The Talaxian royal family, our allies, are in danger. Chen's eyes narrowed. This isn't our fight, Lieutenant. The prime directive... With all due respect, Admiral, Mark interrupted, his voice tight with urgency, we're already involved. My presence on Talax has irrevocably altered the course of events. If we stand by and do nothing, we're effectively supporting Zorn's rebellion and the rival alien faction behind it. The bridge fell silent, all eyes on the Admiral. Chen paced for a moment, then turned to her tactical officer. What assets do we have available for a rapid insertion? Fireteam Prometheus is prepped and ready, Admiral. They could deploy within 10 minutes. Chen nodded sharply. Make it happen. Lieutenant Jones, you'll accompany Fireteam Prometheus to the surface. Your mission is to stabilize the situation and extract the Talaxian leadership if necessary. Is that clear? Mark's heart surged with a mix of relief and anticipation. Crystal clear, Admiral. Thank you. Minutes later, Mark found himself in the Intrepid's armory, suiting up alongside the members of Fireteam Prometheus. The advanced-powered exoskeletons they wore made even the elite UEF Marines look like hulking giants. "Hope you can keep up, Lieutenant," one of them quipped, handing Mark an energy rifle. Mark grinned, the familiar weight of the weapon comforting in his hands. "Don't worry about me. Just be ready for anything down there." The dropship screamed through Talax's atmosphere, the planet's twin moons visible through the viewports. As they approached the Loyalist stronghold, the scale of the battle became clear. Energy blasts crisscrossed the sky, while explosions bloomed across the city's skyline. 30 seconds to touchdown," the pilot's voice crackled over the comm. "Brace for impact." Mark's grip tightened on his rifle as the ship shuddered, touching down in a storm of dust and debris. The moment the ramp lowered, Fire Team Prometheus burst into action, their exoskeletons allowing them to move with inhuman speed and strength. Mark sprinted alongside them, his eyes scanning for familiar faces amidst the chaos. He spotted Captain Vex coordinating a group of defenders near a makeshift barricade. "Vex!" he shouted over the din of battle. "Where's the princess?" The Talaxian officer's eyes widened at the sight of the human reinforcements. "Mark, thank the stars you're here. The princess is leading a counterattack near the central plaza. But Zorn's forces have broken through our eastern flank. We can't hold out much longer." Mark nodded grimly. "Not if we have anything to say about it. Prometheus, let's move." The human Special Forces team carved a path through the rebel lines, their advanced weapons and armor giving them a decisive edge. Mark fought alongside them, his movements a fluid dance of ducking, weaving, and precise shots. As they pushed towards the central plaza, Mark caught glimpses of the battle raging around them. Talaxian soldiers fought with desperate courage, their loyalty to the crown evident in every action. But it was Princess Draco who truly captured his attention. She stood atop a fallen statue, energy pistol in one hand and sword in the other, rallying her troops with fierce tenacity. Her golden scales gleamed in the light of the explosions, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. Their eyes met across the battlefield, and for a moment everything else fell away. Then reality crashed back as a massive explosion rocked the plaza. "Zorn!" Draco's voice rang out, filled with rage and defiance. Mark turned to see the rebel general himself striding through the smoke, flanked by his elite guards. Zorn's eyes locked onto Mark, a sneer twisting his features. "So, the human returns," Zorn growled. "Come to die alongside your alien friends?" Mark raised his rifle, his voice steady. "It's over, Zorn. Your rebellion ends here." The two rushed at each other, the sounds of battle fading into the background as they clashed in a furious duel. Zorn's strength and experience were formidable, but Mark's human reflexes and combat training allowed him to hold his own. They traded blows, neither able to gain a clear advantage. Mark could feel his muscles burning, sweat stinging his eyes as he parried and countered Zorn's relentless assault. Just as his strength began to falter, a blur of golden scales entered his peripheral vision. Princess Draco leapt into the fray, her sword flashing in perfect synchronization with Mark's movements. Together they pressed Zorn back, their combined assault too much for even the seasoned general to handle. With a final, decisive strike, they disarmed him, sending him crashing to the ground. As Fireteam Prometheus secured Zorn and his remaining forces, Mark and Draco stood side by side, breathless but victorious. The sounds of combat faded, replaced by the cheers of loyalist soldiers. Mark turned to Draco, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them in a single look. But before either could speak, King Zaxalor approached, his regal bearing unmarred by the battle's chaos. "Mark Jones," the king's voice carried across the plaza. "Once again, you have proven yourself a true friend to Talax. Your bravery and the timely intervention of your people have saved our world." Mark bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I only did what I believed was right." The king's eyes twinkled with an unreadable emotion. "Perhaps, but such actions deserve recognition and reward." He glanced between Mark and Draco, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I believe I have a proposal that may interest both of you." As the king began to speak, Mark felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. Whatever came next, he knew his life, and the relationship between humans and Talaxians would never be the same. As King Zaxalor finished outlining his proposal, Mark felt a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation coursing through him. The idea of a formal alliance between humans and Talaxians, cemented by his marriage to Princess Draco, was both thrilling and daunting. Before he could fully process the implications, alarms blared across the plaza. Captain Vex rushed towards them, his scales flushed with urgency. "Your Majesty, Princess, Lieutenant Jones, we have multiple attacks in progress across the city," Vex reported, his voice tight with tension. "The targets appear to be centers of human-Talaxian cooperation, including the Joint Research Facility." Mark's combat instincts kicked in immediately. "We need to secure the research facility. That's where our most sensitive work is being conducted." Princess Draco nodded, her eyes flashing with willpower. "Agreed. Father, please ensure your safety. Mark and I will lead the defense." As they sprinted towards the facility, Mark keyed his communicator. "Fireteam Prometheus, rendezvous at the Joint Research Facility. We have a situation." The scene that greeted them was one of chaos. The sleek silver building that housed the human Talaxian research teams was under heavy assault. Energy blasts scorched its exterior, while smoke billowed from several breached sections. Mark quickly assessed the situation, noting the attackers' formations and weaponry. "These aren't Zorn's forces," he muttered. "Their tactics are different, more precise." "Purists!" Draco spat the word like a curse. "Radicals who oppose any cooperation between our species. We've dealt with their propaganda before, but never an attack of this scale." As Fireteam Prometheus arrived, Mark swiftly organized a mixed group of human and Talaxian defenders. "We need to push them back from the main entrance," he ordered. "Prometheus, take the left flank. Talaxian forces, cover the right. Princess Draco and I will lead the central charge." The battle was fierce and chaotic. Mark found himself impressed by the purest weaponry, energy rifles that seemed to combine human and Talaxian technology in ways he hadn't seen before. As he ducked behind a barricade, narrowly avoiding a searing blast, he shouted to Draco, "Their weapons? Where did they get them?" Draco's face was grim as she returned fire. "I don't know, but it suggests they have supporters in powerful positions. This is worse than we thought." Just as the defenders began to gain the upper hand, a familiar voice rang out. "Mark! Princess! They've breached the secure data center." Captain Vex emerged from the smoke, his armor scorched but his eyes blazing with urgency. Mark nodded, understanding the implications immediately. "Vex, take command here. Draco and I will secure the data center." They fought their way through the facility's winding corridors, the sounds of battle echoing around them. Upon reaching the data center, they found a group of purists frantically downloading information from the main terminals. Mark didn't hesitate. He charged in, his energy rifle blazing. Draco was right beside him, her movements fluid and deadly. Together they made short work of the intruders, but not before one of them managed to escape with a data drive. "Damn it!" Mark growled, surveying the damage. "They got something. We need to find out what." In the aftermath of the attack, as medical teams tended to the wounded and security forces secured the perimeter, Mark found himself in a tense meeting with King Zaxalor, Princess Draco, and newly arrived Admiral Chen. "This attack changes everything," Admiral Chen said, her voice taut with terrifying anger. "The purists have shown they're willing to use violence to oppose our alliance. We need to reevaluate our position." King Zaxalor nodded solemnly. "Indeed, but we cannot let fear dictate our actions. This attack, terrible as it was, also demonstrates why our alliance is so crucial." Mark, his mind racing with the implications of the stolen data, spoke up. "We need to investigate the purist support network. Their weapons and intel suggest they have backers in both human and Talaxian societies." Princess Draco, her golden scales still smudged with soot from the battle, agreed. "Mark's right. We can't move forward with our plans until we root out this threat." Admiral Chen's eyes narrowed. "Plans? What plans exactly?" King Zaxalor exchanged a glance with Mark and Draco before responding. "We were discussing a formal alliance, Admiral. one that would be symbolized by the marriage of Lieutenant Jones and Princess Draco. Chen's eyebrows shot up. That's unprecedented. The political implications alone. She was interrupted by the arrival of a human woman in a lab coat. "Admiral, Your Majesty, I have some information that might be relevant to this discussion." "Dr. Ilara Harper," Chen introduced the newcomer, "our leading xenobiologist. Doctor, what have you found?" Dr. Harper's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Our preliminary studies show a remarkable genetic compatibility between humans and Talaxians. The implications for medical advancements, not to mention the possibility of viable offspring, are staggering." The room fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled over them. Mark felt Draco's hand slip into his, and he squeezed it gently, both of them acutely aware of the new dimension this added to their relationship. King Zaxler was the first to speak. "This changes nothing about our immediate concerns, but it does reinforce the potential benefits of our alliance. Admiral Chen, will you support our efforts to formalize this union?" Chen hesitated, her gaze moving from the king to Mark and Draco, then back again. Finally, she nodded. "Conditionally, we need to neutralize the purest threat and stabilize the political situation first. But if we can do that, then yes, I believe this alliance could be beneficial for both our peoples." Mark stepped forward. "Then let's make it happen. Princess Draco and I will lead the investigation into the purists. We'll find out who's backing them and put a stop to their operations." As the others nodded in agreement, Mark felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He knew the path ahead would be dangerous, filled with political intrigue and the constant threat of violence. But as he looked at Draco, seeing the same dedication reflected in her eyes, he knew they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they would forge a new future for humans and Talaxians, a future of unity, cooperation, and hope. But first, they had a conspiracy to unravel and a shadowy enemy to defeat. The real work was just beginning. The real work had only just started. Over the next few weeks, Mark and Princess Draco threw themselves into their investigation of the purists. They worked tirelessly, poring over intelligence reports, interrogating suspects, and analyzing data from both human and Talaxian sources. Their efforts bore fruit as they gradually pieced together a complex network of purist supporters within both societies. But one name kept surfacing in their investigation: Krell, the elderly former royal advisor who had once provided Mark with crucial information. "It doesn't make sense," Draco said, her brow furrowed as she studied a holographic display of their findings. "Krell has always been a staunch supporter of the crown. Why would he be involved with the purists?" Mark leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. "Sometimes the most unexpected people can surprise you. We need to confront him directly." They arranged a meeting with Krell in a secure location within the palace. As they entered the room, Mark noticed the old Talaxian's nervous demeanor, his scales shifting in an agitated pattern. "Krell," Draco began, her voice gentle but firm, "we need to talk about your involvement with the purist." The former advisor's eyes widened. I don't know what you're talking about, Your Highness." Mark stepped forward, his face set in a grim expression. "We have evidence, Krell. Multiple sources point to your involvement. It's time to come clean." For a moment, Krell maintained his innocence, but under the combined pressure of Mark's steady gaze and Draco's regal authority, he crumbled. His shoulders sagged, and he let out a long, shuddering breath. "I never wanted this," Krell whispered, his voice thick with emotion. They blackmailed me, used mistakes from my past against me. I had no choice." As Krell spilled the details of his involvement, Mark and Draco exchanged glances. The information was damning, but it also provided them with a crucial advantage. Krell revealed the purist plans to attack the upcoming public ceremony that would officially announce the Human-Talaxian Alliance and Mark and Draco's engagement. Armed with this intelligence, Mark sprang into action. He coordinated with Captain Vex and the UEF security team, establishing a multi-layered defense perimeter around the ceremony venue. Human and Talaxian forces were strategically positioned, their strengths complementing each other in a sophisticated security net. The day of the ceremony arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension. As Mark adjusted his formal uniform, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Draco entered his quarters, resplendent in her ceremonial armor, her scales shimmering with an iridescent sheen. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. Mark nodded, double-checking his concealed sidearm. "As ready as we'll ever be." They made their way to the grand balcony where they would make their public appearance. The streets below were packed with a mix of humans and Talaxians, their faces turned expectantly towards the palace. Just as King Zaxler began his speech, chaos erupted. Explosions rocked the perimeter, and cloaked figures materialized within the security cordon. Mark's earpiece crackled with Lyra's voice. "Multiple intruders detected. Cloaking technology neutralized." Without hesitation, Mark leapt into action. "Prometheus, with me! Draco, secure the inner sanctum!" The next few minutes were a blur of intense combat. Mark led his mixed human-Talaxian strike team against the main Purist force, their practiced maneuvers showcasing the effectiveness of their joint training. Energy weapons flashed, and the air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and smoke. As Mark fought his way through the Purist ranks, he found himself face-to-face with a human in advanced combat armor. The man's helmet retracted, revealing a face Mark recognized from UEF records. "Victor Kane," Mark growled, raising his weapon. Kane smirked, his eyes gleaming with fanatical intensity. "The famous Mark Jones, here to play hero for your alien friends?" Without warning, Kane charged. Mark barely had time to dodge, feeling the wind from Kane's attack brush past him. What followed was a brutal hand-to-hand fight, each combatant pushing their bodies to the limit. As they grappled, Kane spat words of hatred and division. "Humans and Talaxians can never truly unite. We'll always be separate, always be enemies." Mark gritted his teeth, blocking a vicious punch. "You're wrong, Kane. We're stronger together. This alliance proves it." Their fight raged on, a microcosm of the larger battle between unity and division. Mark found himself being pushed to his absolute limits. Kane's combat skills honed by years of military experience and fueled by zealous conviction. Just when it seemed Kane might gain the upper hand, Mark spotted an opening. With a move that combined human martial arts with a Talaxian grappling technique Draco had taught him, he managed to disarm Kane and pin him to the ground. Breathing heavily, Mark spoke. "It's over, Kane. Surrender now." For a moment, it seemed Kane might accept defeat. Then, with a manic grin, he reached for a hidden device on his belt. "If I can't win, no one will." Mark's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. In a split-second decision, he grabbed Kane and hurled them both towards a nearby energy shield. The explosion ripped through the air just as they hit the shield. The world went white, then black. When Mark regained consciousness, he found himself in a sterile medical bay. The steady beep of monitoring equipment filled the air, and he could feel the dull ache of numerous injuries beneath a haze of painkillers. Dr. Alara Harper's face swam into view. "Welcome back, Lieutenant. You gave us quite a scare." As Mark's vision cleared, he noticed both human and Talaxian medical staff bustling around the room. Dr. Harper explained how they had used a groundbreaking combination of human and Talaxian medical techniques to save his life. Before Mark could fully process this information, the door slid open, revealing Princess Draco. Her usual composure slipped as she rushed to his bedside, grasping his hand tightly. "You fool," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't you ever do that to me again." Mark managed a weak smile. "No promises, Princess. How bad is it?" Draco's expression turned serious. "The Purists have been defeated, but there's a new challenge. The Talaxian Royal Council has invoked ancient laws. For our marriage to be valid, for you to be accepted as a true member of Talaxian society, you must undergo the traditional trials." Mark's mind raced considering the implications. These trials, never before attempted by a non-Talaxian, would test him physically, mentally, and culturally. His performance would determine not just his personal future with Draco, but the fate of the entire human-Talaxian alliance. Despite the pain racking his body, Mark felt a surge of drive. He met Draco's gaze, seeing in her eyes the same mix of concern and hope he felt. "When do we start?" "Start?" Mark asked, his voice hoarse but determined. Draco squeezed his hand. "The Royal Council has granted you 1 month to recover and prepare. It's not much time, but it's all we have." Dr. Harper interjected, her eyes bright with excitement. "Lieutenant, I've been working on a specialized rehabilitation program. It's designed to not only speed up your recovery, but also prepare you for the trials ahead." Over the next few weeks, Mark's days fell into a grueling routine. Mornings began with Dr. Harper's innovative physical therapy sessions, combining human medical techniques with Talaxian healing practices. The afternoons were devoted to rigorous training with Princess Draco, who pushed him to his limits in Talaxian martial arts, language, and customs. As Mark struggled through a particularly challenging language lesson, Draco's tail lashed in frustration. "You must roll your R's more, Mark, like this. Krthalanax." Mark attempted the word again, his tongue fumbling over the alien sounds. Draco sighed, her scales shifting to a darker hue. "Perhaps we should take a break." "No," Mark insisted, pushing himself up from his chair. "Let's keep going. I can do this." Draco's expression softened. "Your dedication is admirable, but remember these trials are designed to test Talaxians who have had a lifetime to prepare. You're attempting to compress years of learning into mere weeks." Mark nodded, acknowledging the enormity of the task before him. "I know, but I have to try. For us, for the Alliance, for everything we've fought for." As the day of the first trial approached, tension mounted in the palace. Conservative factions within the Talaxian government openly criticized the princess for her involvement with a human. Mark overheard snippets of conversations as he passed through the corridors, words like corruption of bloodlines and erosion of tradition following in his wake. Finally, the day of the first trial arrived. Mark stood at the edge of a dense Talaxian jungle, its alien flora pulsing with bioluminescence. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of unfamiliar blossoms and decay. A Talaxian elder approached, carrying an ornate crystal sphere. "Human," he said, his voice gravelly, "your task is to carry this orb of ancestry through the jungle of trials. You must reach the sacred grove before the third sun sets." Mark took the orb, surprised by its weight. As he stepped into the jungle, he heard Draco's voice behind him. "Remember your training, Mark. Trust your instincts." The jungle was unlike anything Mark had ever experienced. Vines writhed like living things, grasping at his ankles. Strange, chittering creatures scurried in the underbrush. More than once, Mark had to use his military training to evade predators that seemed to materialize from the very air. As the second sun began to set, Mark's muscles screamed with fatigue. His recent injuries throbbed, threatening to overwhelm him. But he pushed on, one foot in front of the other, the orb clutched tightly to his chest. Just as the third sun touched the horizon, Mark burst into a clearing. Ancient stone monoliths rose before him, humming with an otherworldly energy. He placed the orb on a central altar, collapsing to his knees as cheers erupted from the watching Talaxians. The second trial came only days later. Mark found himself in a cavernous hangar, faced with the skeletal remains of an ancient Talaxian spacecraft. "Repair and pilot this vessel through the asteroid field of Cathala," the Talaxian judge instructed. Mark's hands moved with growing confidence over the alien controls. He recognized similarities to human technology, but there were significant differences that required him to adapt quickly. As he worked, he muttered Talaxian technical terms Draco had drilled into him. Finally, the engines hummed to life. Mark strapped himself in and guided the ship out of the hangar. The asteroid field loomed before him, a chaotic dance of rock and ice. Drawing on both his human pilot training and Draco's lessons, Mark wove through the field with a grace that left the Talaxian observers murmuring in approval. As Mark progressed through the trials, he became aware of a shift in the atmosphere. Talaxians who had once regarded him with suspicion now nodded respectfully as he passed. He overheard conversations in the market, filled with grudging admiration for the human who dared to attempt their sacred trials. The third trial thrust Mark into the heart of Talaxian politics. He found himself seated across from Graxtor, leader of the Merchants Guild, notorious for his hard bargaining tactics. "So human?" Graxtor sneered, his scales rippling with disdain. "You think you can negotiate with us? Let's see how you handle real Talaxian commerce." What followed was a grueling battle of wits. Mark drew on every scrap of knowledge he'd gleaned about Talaxian culture and economy. He proposed trade routes that would benefit both parties, suggested technological exchanges that piqued Graxtor's interest, and even threw in a few Talaxian idioms that made the old merchant's eyes widen in surprise. By the end of the negotiations, Graxtor was nodding with grudging respect. "Perhaps," he admitted, "there is more to you than meets the eye, human." As Mark prepared for the fourth trial, a combat demonstration, he felt a creeping sense of unease. His body felt sluggish, his reactions dulled. As he entered the arena, his vision swam, and he stumbled. "Mark!" Draco's voice cut through the haze. "Something's wrong!" But there was no time to investigate. His opponent, a seasoned Talaxian warrior, was already advancing. Mark shook his head, trying to clear it, and fell into a defensive stance. The fight that followed was a blur of pain and desperation. Mark's body refused to respond as it should, every movement an act of sheer will. But he pressed on, drawing on every ounce of training and drive. In the end, bloodied and barely standing, Mark completed the required combat forms. As he staggered from the arena, he collapsed into Draco's arms. "Biological agent?" Dr. Harper's voice seemed to come from far away. "Targeted at human physiology. We need to act fast." The next few days passed in a fever dream as human and Talaxian medical teams worked tirelessly to counteract the purist's latest attack. When Mark finally regained full consciousness, he found Dr. Harper beaming at him. "We did it," she said. "The cure we developed, it's not just for this agent. Mark, this could revolutionize cross-species medicine." As Mark recovered, news arrived of a gathering storm. A rival alien species, threatened by the growing human-Talaxian alliance, was amassing forces at the edge of Talaxian space. Admiral Chen's hologram flickered in Mark's room. "This situation is volatile, Lieutenant. We need this alliance now more than ever. The final trials—" "I understand, Admiral," Mark said, already pushing himself out of bed. "I won't let you down." The penultimate trial was a test unlike any Mark had faced before. He found himself in a holographic chamber, surrounded by scenes from Talaxian history. He watched great battles unfold, witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties, and faced moral dilemmas that had shaped Talaxian society. At each turn, Mark was required to make decisions, to demonstrate his understanding of Talaxian values and philosophy. He drew not only on his lessons with Draco, but also on his own experiences, offering perspectives that bridged human and Talaxian viewpoints. As the simulation ended, Mark saw something he never expected on the faces of the Royal Council members: genuine intrigue. Now, as Mark stood before the full Royal Council, preparing to face the final and most challenging trial, he felt the weight of expectations from both humans and Talaxians. The fate of the Alliance, his future with Draco, and the looming threat of interstellar conflict all hinged on his performance. "Mark Jones," the chief counselor intoned, his voice echoing through the grand chamber, "are you prepared to face the trial of unity?" Mark squared his shoulders, his gaze steady. "I am." Mark replied, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The chief counselor nodded gravely. "Then let the trial of unity commence." Mark was led to an ancient stone archway, its surface covered in intricate Talaxian glyphs. As he stepped through, the world around him shimmered and faded, replaced by the stark interior of a transport pod. Through the viewport, he saw a jagged mountain range looming before him. The pod touched down at the base of a towering cliff face. As Mark exited, he felt the biting chill of the thin mountain air. A single communicator lay on a nearby rock, which he clipped to his belt. "The crucible of ascension begins now," a voice crackled through the device. "Your first task awaits." Mark approached the cliff, its sheer surface stretching impossibly high. He began his ascent, fingers searching for tiny cracks and protrusions. As he climbed, the rock beneath his hands crumbled without warning. Mark barely managed to maintain his grip as chunks of stone tumbled past him. Halfway up, a noxious green gas began seeping from vents in the rock face. Mark's eyes watered and his lungs burned. He pulled his shirt over his nose, trying to filter the toxic fumes as he continued his climb. Near the top, a massive boulder dislodged above him. Mark swung to the side, his muscles screaming in protest as he clung to the cliff with one hand. The boulder crashed past, missing him by inches. With a final surge of effort, Mark hauled himself over the edge. He lay on his back, chest heaving, as he caught his breath. "Impressive," the voice on the communicator said. "Proceed to the next chamber." Mark entered a vast circular room. Holographic symbols floated in the air, a mix of complex mathematical equations and Talaxian cultural icons. A large spherical device sat in the center, covered in buttons and dials. Mark studied the floating symbols, his mind racing. He recognized patterns from Draco's lessons on Talaxian history and mythology. Combining this knowledge with his understanding of human mathematics, he began to see connections. His fingers flew over the device's controls, inputting a solution that bridged Talaxian symbolism with advanced calculus. The sphere hummed to life, projecting a complete star map of Talaxian space. "Remarkable," the voice said. "You have unlocked ancient star charts. This knowledge may prove vital in the coming days." As Mark moved to the next chamber, he heard urgent voices in the background of the communication channel. "Vidian's ships have breached our outer defenses. Should we halt the trial?" "No," Mark heard Draco's voice, firm and clear. "He must continue. This could be our best hope." The next room was eerily empty. As Mark stepped inside, holographic images flickered to life around him. He saw Earth engulfed in flames, Vidian's ships darkening the sky. The scene shifted to Draco, her face twisted in disgust as she turned away from him. Then he saw himself, standing amidst the ruins of the human-Talaxian alliance, alone and defeated. Mark's heart raced, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. "These aren't real," he muttered. "Focus on the mission." He walked through the holograms, his steps steady. As he reached the other side of the room, the images faded. "Your mental fortitude is commendable," the voice said, a note of respect evident. The fourth chamber was a large dojo-like space. Robotic opponents designed to mimic Talaxian physiology activated as Mark entered. They moved with inhuman speed and precision, attacking from all angles. Mark fell into a fighting stance, blending the Talaxian martial arts Draco had taught him with his human combat training. He ducked under a swinging arm, using the robot's momentum to throw it into another. As a third opponent charged, Mark executed a complex Talaxian maneuver, redirecting its energy to disable it. The fight was brutal and exhausting, but Mark emerged victorious. He stood among the disabled robots, bruised but unbeaten. "An impressive display of martial skill," the voice commented. "You have integrated our techniques with your own in a most effective manner." The final chamber was small and simple. 2 doors stood before Mark, each with a plaque describing its consequences. The first read, "This path guarantees your success in the trial, but requires compromising a sacred Talaxian artifact." The second, "This path upholds Talaxian principles, but may result in your failure." Mark didn't hesitate. He chose the second door. As he stepped through, he found himself back in the grand chamber before the Royal Council. Their expressions were a mix of surprise and approval. The chief counselor stood. "Mark Jones, you have completed the crucible of ascension. Your choice in the final chamber demonstrates a true understanding and respect for our values. We hereby declare you worthy of joining Talaxian society and of union with Princess Draco." Before Mark could respond, alarms blared throughout the chamber. A holographic display appeared, showing Vidian's ships advancing on Talaxian positions. The Talaxian king rose, his voice carrying over the chaos. "In light of Mark Jones's success and the grave threat we face, I officially recognize him as a member of our society and grant approval for his marriage to Princess Draco." As the king spoke, the temple began to hum with energy. Hidden panels slid open, revealing advanced technology that had laid dormant for millennia. "The ancestral defense system," a counselor gasped, It's activating. Admiral Chen's hologram appeared. Lieutenant, we're detecting a massive power surge from your location. What's happening down there? Mark looked to Draco, who had rushed to his side. She squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride and commitment. Admiral, Mark said, I think we've just evened the odds. Odds. Mark's voice rang with confidence as he turned to face the assembled leaders. Admiral Chen's hologram nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Lieutenant. Now we need you and Princess Draco on the front lines. Report to the USS Harmony immediately. Mark and Draco exchanged a determined glance before sprinting from the chamber. As they raced through the winding corridors of the Talaxian Royal Complex, alarms blared and personnel rushed to battle stations. They emerged onto a landing pad where a sleek hybrid shuttle awaited. Its design blended the angular efficiency of human technology with the organic curves favored by Talaxians. Mark and Draco boarded swiftly, strapping themselves into the pilot and co-pilot seats. As the shuttle lifted off, Mark caught a glimpse of the Talaxian capital below. The once peaceful cityscape now bristled with defense turrets and shimmered under a protective energy shield. Energy readings are off the charts, Draco reported, her fingers dancing across the control panel. The ancestral defense system is fully operational. The shuttle broke atmosphere, revealing a sight that made Mark's breath catch. The vastness of space was filled with ships, the gleaming silver of the human fleet, the biomechanical majesty of Talaxian vessels, and the ominous, spiked forms of the Vidian Armada. They docked with the USS Harmony, a massive ship that embodied the best of both human and Talaxian engineering. As Mark and Draco rushed to the bridge, they passed teams of mixed species working in perfect synchronization. Admiral Chen greeted them as they arrived. The Vidians have launched a full-scale assault. We're outnumbered 3-1. Mark studied the tactical display, his mind racing. Admiral, if we reconfigure our shield harmonics to match the frequency of the ancestral defense system, we might be able to extend its protection to our entire fleet. Chen's eyes widened. Do it! As Draco worked with the Talaxian technicians to implement the change, Mark coordinated with the human tactical officers. Concentrate fire on their lead ships. If we can disrupt their formation, we can divide their forces. The battle erupted in earnest. The void of space lit up with weapons fire as ships danced in deadly maneuvers. Mark watched as human cruisers executed precision strikes, while Talaxian vessels moved with fluid grace, their organic hulls absorbing and redirecting enemy fire. Admiral, Mark said, an idea forming, Draco and I can do more out there. Request permission to take out the prototype fighter. Chen hesitated for a moment before nodding. Granted, show them what this alliance can do. Mark and Draco raced to the hangar bay where a unique craft awaited them. Sleek and predatory, it combined the best elements of both species' fighter designs. As they climbed in, the cockpit adjusted to their physiology, interfaces blending seamlessly. Ready? Mark asked, his hand hovering over the launch controls. Draco's scaled hand covered his. Always. They launched into the fray, the fighter responding to their inputs with unparalleled precision. Mark piloted while Draco handled weapons and defense systems, their movements in perfect harmony. Their fighter wove through the chaos of battle, unleashing devastation upon the Vidian fleet. Human captains cheered as they carved a path through enemy lines, while Talaxian crews watched in awe at the display of unified strength. As they looped around for another attack run, Mark noticed a pattern in the Vidian fleet's movements. Draco, look at their flagship. The ships around it are creating a rotating defense screen, but there's a cyclical gap in their coverage. Draco analyzed the data. You're right. If we time it perfectly, we might be able to slip through. Mark opened a channel to the Harmony. Admiral, we've identified a weakness in the Vidian formation. Request permission to lead a strike team against their flagship. There was a moment of tense silence before Chen's voice crackled through. It's risky, but it might be our best shot. Permission granted. I'm sending you a squad of our best. As Mark and Draco regrouped with the strike team, a mix of human and Talaxian elite forces, they quickly briefed them on the plan. The ancient Talaxian device they had activated was loaded onto their fighter, its purpose now clear. We'll need to fight our way to their central computer core, Mark explained. Once there, we can use this device to overload their systems. The team launched, their fighters moving in tight formation. As they approached the Vidian flagship, Mark watched the rotating defense screen, counting down in his head. Now! They punched through the gap, alarms blaring as the Vidians recognized the breach. The strike team landed in a secondary hangar, immediately engaging the enemy forces that swarmed to repel them. Mark and Draco fought side by side, their movements complementing each other perfectly. Human pulse rifles barked in concert with Talaxian energy weapons as they pushed forward. They battled through winding corridors, the architecture of the Vidian ship as alien and unsettling as its crew. In a moment of chaos, a Vidian soldier leveled its weapon at Mark. Draco saw it a split second before he did, shoving him aside and taking the blast to her shoulder. "Draco!" Mark cried out, dispatching the Vidian with a well-placed shot. She grimaced, clutching her wounded shoulder. "I'm fine. We have to keep moving." Mark's training as a combat medic kicked in. He quickly applied a regenerative patch to her wound, the advanced human medical technology immediately beginning to heal the damage. With renewed drive, they pressed on. The corridors became narrower, the resistance fiercer as they neared the ship's core. Mark supported Draco, her injury slowing her, but not dampening her perseverance. Finally, they breached the central chamber. A massive computer core pulsed with alien energy, its surface covered in biomechanical interfaces. "Cover us!" Mark shouted to the strike team as he and Draco approached the core. As their team held off waves of Vidian soldiers, Mark and Draco worked in tandem to interface the Talaxian device with the alien systems. The device hummed to life, ancient glyphs glowing with power. "It's working," Draco said, her voice tight with pain and exertion. "The overload is beginning." Suddenly, the ship shuddered. Lights flickered and alarms blared. The Vidian soldiers attacking them stopped in confusion as their weapons powered down. "Back to the fighters," Mark ordered, scooping up Draco in his arms despite her protest. They fought their way back through the now chaotic ship, Vidian crew members running in panic as systems failed around them. They reached their fighters just as a massive energy wave pulsed out from the flagship. As they launched back into space, Mark and Draco watched in awe as the energy wave washed over the Vidian fleet. Ship after ship went dark, weapons and engines failing. Admiral Chen's voice came through their comms, filled with triumph. "Whatever you did, it worked. The entire Vidian fleet is powering down. Their leaders are hailing us, suing for peace." Cheers erupted across the human and Talaxian channels. As the adrenaline of battle faded, Mark looked at Draco, her face etched with pain, but her eyes shining with victory and love. "We did it," he said softly, reaching out to take her hand. Draco smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "Together," she replied. As they flew back to the Harmony, the once chaotic battlefield, now still, Mark knew that this was just the beginning. The real work of forging a lasting peace and building their new life together was about to begin.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.